I can't.
Above and beyond borders.
Beyond borders.
It's Borderline
with Ireti Bakare-Yusuf.
Did you see me waving, doing all sorts of things with my hand in the studio? And he's just stood in front of my camera. Yes. Welcome back to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. It's an interesting, I told you, a very interesting episode we have for you today, including what's going on in the studio for those of you who saw it. Right, my next guest is better known as Mariam the Ugandan. She's a Ugandan-born commentator, she's smiling, whose incisive Pan-African analysis has become a vital voice connecting African struggles with global movements for justice. Our focus is Uganda, the ICJ, and Gaza. Uganda has walked a tightrope. In June, its foreign minister condemned Israeli attacks on Iran and called a ceasefire in Gaza. Yet, Kampala continues to deepen military ties and surveillance with Israel, including new defense and border control technologies. With Mariam, we'll be exploring how Uganda's diplomacy, its historic ties with Israel, and Sebutinde's descent shape Africa's perspective on Gaza, and what this means for transnational solidarity and the credibility of the global justice institutions. Mariam, welcome to Borderlines.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me and for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I'm very, very glad to be here with you.
Oh, no,
today.
it's an absolute pleasure. It's my honor, honestly. I mean, your voice is highly respected across Africa, especially East Africa. So you are most important. Indeed. Let's talk about, we'll get to it because the time goes so incredibly fast. It's crazy. President Museveni is going to be running again. What are your thoughts? I'm going to be direct, just quickly.
It's more of the same. It's more of the same. I always say that we live under a soft dictatorship. This is not a secret to anyone who has been in Uganda. This man has been ruling the country longer than I have been alive. So for the past almost 40 years now, we've had one person. We have sham elections after sham elections after sham elections, and he's always winning by a landslide. So it is going to be tough. In the last election cycle in 2021, there were multiple arrests. There were multiple civilian casualties. It was just a horrific suppression of the civilians, of the citizens of Uganda, and I expect no different this time around. But time will tell. I hope I'm proved wrong, but time will tell.
Indeed. Let's talk about Israel's security footprint in Uganda. Indeed, Israel's expansionist ambition in Africa as a whole, if you want to go that far. What is going on? I mean, Israel signed an agreement to install smart border surveillance in Uganda. Given Uganda's record of internet shutdowns, how should Ugandans understand the risk of importing Israel surveillance technologies? Indeed, how should Africans actually connect with that and interpret it?
I think we need to start by looking historically, because this did not just start over the last couple of years. Israel has had a constant presence throughout the African continent, going back all to the years of apartheid in South Africa. It was one of the few countries that still sold arms and spyware to the apartheid regime when the embargo was in place in South Africa. It did the same thing in Nigeria during the Biafra Wars. It supplied ammunition, same thing in Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, Angola, all up and down the African continent. Israel has its footprints scattered. So that's the first thing we need to know. I think for so long we have been asleep and we haven't been aware of just how deeply ingrained Israel has been in our home continent, and that has to change. When it comes to Uganda specifically, we have a long history of Israel being embedded in our security apparatus back in the days of Milton Obote, back in the days of Idi Amin, all the way till Museveni now, where now they're giving us security apparatus to control the borders. This is just an escalation of Museveni tightening down on censoring the people of my country, which is very tragic because we have over maybe 40% of the Ugandans are under the age of 40. And he's using that power to just keep a tight grip on the voices of the people. So I think we need to be alarmed. In my opinion, we're not alarmed enough. But yes, I think we really need to pay attention to what is happening.
And indeed, if we do pay attention, though, what can the people do? Because we are dealing with, let's be honest, the Almighty Israel who has subjugated, occupied, continues to, and is genociding Palestinians right now. So how do we Africans, what can we do? Even we're literally, we're making Africans aware on this show. We do that all the time. We do the education. They know. What can they do with that knowledge, and how do they use it?
I might be jumping the gun here, but this is where that transnational solidarity comes in, because we cannot do anything by ourselves. As you said, we have the Almighty Israel backed by the Almighty America. That is a killer combination right there that is very hard to go against. Even superpowers like China and Iran are hesitant to rock that specific boat. It's simply too powerful. But I've always said that there is a huge divide, a huge chasm between Africans, us who are born and raised in Africa and who call that our home, and the Africa diaspora. Because when we look at how much experience the African Americans, just as an example, have with dealing with oppression and how they've come up with ways to navigate that kind of oppression, or even the Palestinians, they've been incredible at coming up with so many ways to support each other abroad and back home. These are the people we need to be learning from. These are the people who we need to be connecting with so that we can learn how to address the systems. It's not going to be a one-person show. It cannot be a one-person show to take down such an empire. It is collaborative, and I think that's the focus we need to apply to this problem.
So it's about Africa coming together as one voice again, rather than dispersed and with borders separating what's affecting us, because that's what continues to happen, right? Those borders become harder, and they're used by the people on the outside.
Absolutely, 100%. I could talk about that for another hour, but that is definitely one of the problems that we have. We have the African bloc, but we're not united as a front whenever we go to places like, let's say, the ICJ or even the United Nations. They see us as 54 different countries. But if we were to go as one bloc with one voice, that could bring a huge, huge, huge change.
It's interesting that you mentioned the ICJ. Let's talk about Justice Julia Sebuntinde. I can see the smile on your face already. She was the only judge to oppose all 6 measures that South Africa argued against Israel and created the plausible risk of genocide. What does this lone dissent reveal about the gap between African elite jurisprudence and the popular African sense of solidarity with Palestine? In fact, what does it reveal about her? Let's talk about the character.
Let us start there, because I think that's very important to actually understand. I've always said that one problem that we have in Africa is the problem of Christian Zionism. We need to address that elephant in the room before we even start talking about what drives people to make such decisions. It's one thing to be Christian, you go to church, you pray, you fast your Lent, you do whatever you do, you have your belief in Christ. But we need to understand why so many Christians in Africa are so enamored by the idea that Israel, the country today, is the country of the chosen people of God. We need to dissect that argument, and we need to break it down and say, Israel today is not Israel of the Bible or of the Quran or of the Torah. We need to start there. We need to understand how they were able to warp our understanding and convince us that we cannot be opposed to such people. Because this is Justice Sabutinde's stance. She said that she believes that we are in the end of times and she is going to be standing firm with Israel because it's what God wants her to do. This is brainwashing. We need to actually call it out as explicitly as we possibly can.
But if I can interrupt you, how dangerous is that, though, from the mouth of a judge, a justice in the highest court in the universe, effectively?
Exactly. It sets such a dangerous precedent. And if I could just say, if we had a Muslim judge, and we do have a Muslim judge on the ICJ, if he was to get up there and quote the Quran and say that based on his beliefs, he is going to make such a ruling, no one would stand for this. But Justice Sabutinde was able to do that. So there is very blatant hypocrisy at play right there. We need to acknowledge that. But most dangerously, it sets a precedent because now any other judge can base their future rulings on this, because if this is allowed to stand, and it was, then we don't even know what else can be allowed to stand in the future. The ICJ is already discredited because if we as a generation, as a population in the world today, can let this pass and we say, well, it takes decades to prove genocide. And there's been genocidal intent from the mouths of Israeli leaders, the prime minister, the secretaries, and we're still saying, oh, we have to wait until we can actually prove it. What is the purpose of all these bodies? What's the purpose of the UN, of the ICJ? These bodies that esteemed themselves as the most civilized, as the most educated, they're useless. And this is another step of just really washing away their credibility, in my eyes.
Indeed, you're correct, because the world, when Israel told us on October 8th what their intentions were, the world for some reason refused to accept. The world for some reason, intentionally pretended that they didn't understand what was being said. And you're right. What does that say to us about human beings? But I mean, as humanity, but even more so is, what's this space? I mean, the African elite and the ordinary African, is that gap just growing wider and wider?
Yes, I would say yes. In a heartbeat, I would say yes. And my logic is always to follow the money. Why was the ICJ created? Who is funding the ICJ? Who is the person who gains the most out of these ICJ rulings? And the same thing goes with the UN and so on. So I did some research on this, and it's quite fascinating. When the ICJ was formed, there were only a handful of countries that opposed its formation. One of them was the United States, because they knew they would be liable for what they did in Japan, for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Israel was also very much against, and also Qatar and some other countries. So you have to understand, who does the ICJ serve? And the US is one of the most aggressive perpetrators of injustice in the world, because if they can place embargoes on UN repertoires, if they can cut funding on such organizations, then we have to know that they're not doing all this work without any bias. We have to know that there is an agenda behind all the rulings and everything that is put in place. And this goes to our African elites as well, because you have to understand, if someone like Justice Sebutinde can go to the ICJ and she can make a rule, I always think of following the money. If I could, I'd be like, what's in her bank account? I need to understand if there are any deposits, but this is just speculative for me. But it's very important to understand where the money from these institutions comes from and how this affects their impartiality. It almost always does. Always.
And it's interesting that you even mentioned the US and even the UN. The US is owing the UN, I think, something like $1.3 billion in dues that they're supposed to pay as a country to the United Nations. But nobody talks about that, do they?
No. It's very fascinating, because when we African countries have a debt that goes to the IMF, the World Bank, they will not let us rest. They will never let us rest. We'll have to sell our resources, our land. We'll put ourselves in these shackles that we can never break out of. But the US is trillions in debt, and somehow everyone is still okay with it. And that's another blatant hypocrisy we see right there. Indeed. Very blatant.
Let's talk about Pegasus. Pegasus, the spyware. Do you see Uganda becoming another node in what Edward Snowden the whistleblower, once called the global architecture of oppression. Indeed, do you see many countries in Africa? I know for a fact that my country, Nigeria, spend a lot of money on spyware and they buy from Israel, right? Do you see us, Africa, lots of countries in Africa becoming, falling into that trap of, the global architecture of oppression?
Absolutely. I think it's just a matter of time. I live in England, so I can tell you for a fact this was already launched here. We have cameras that monitor us all over. I know in the US they have a Palantir system. Down in London, they have kind of software that's facial recognition. So whenever you walk around the street, it's supposed to preemptively prevent crime. So if these things that were tested out in Gaza, and this is for a fact, it was already tested out in Gaza during this genocide, have already been deployed to the Western world, to the more developed countries, it is only a matter of time before they eventually get to our African countries. And I'm very frightened and very worried that their installation will be very quiet because we won't have as many eyes and we won't have as many voices. One of the main problems we suffer from is suppression of news that's coming out of the continent. So we won't even know until too late that this has already been happened. But I can absolutely see that happening within a few years.
Indeed. London, the UK, where I grew up, is known to have the largest kilometers of CCTV. And even in the recent, what was it yesterday? The Notting Hill Carnival, they had facial recognition software. I mean, that was unheard of. I've been going to the carnival since I was 7. I was in shock to hear that.
That got launched this year, at least I saw the news of that being launched this year, and it was like living in a Black Mirror episode. I'm like, well, we're all being spied on at this point in time.
Yes, and then all these young black boys who were attending went in balaclavas because that was the only way they could protect their identity.
Absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
We've got to ask, or at least I have to ask, what we're seeing, the genocide that we're seeing in Gaza, that's been going on for 22 months, how badly is it shaping the world? Or reshaping, rather?
It's one of those things where I know it's bad, but I know we will not know how bad it is until many years later. I can give a very simple example. And this is someone I know personally. She works on a search and rescue ship in the Mediterranean trying to get refugees who flee from Libya. And over the last few months, we've seen flotillas trying to go to Gaza to break the siege, and it's just a horrific situation. And they're always detained, they're fired upon, and whoever is on board is either arrested or eventually released to go back to their home country. My friend was telling me that as of yesterday, it has now become a norm to actually fire on search and rescue ships. This was not acceptable before. They were known as neutral vessels. You did not attack them. Their job is just to rescue people who are at sea, who might die. This was a known fact. But Israel has changed the game completely, because the more evil it has committed, the more it has pushed the bar of acceptable evil. So now all across the world, if any tyrant is to do anything, they're like, well, Israel did it first. So why even? I think we will really not be sure about how badly this situation is going to be until many years later. And by then it will be too late, unfortunately.
Well, let's talk about the Israel. Before I come back, I'm going to go back a little bit. In the 1900s, the Zionists wanted a state in Uganda. Talk to... I see you're laughing. I mean, you've got to ask yourself, this is the thing. Herzl didn't think of Palestine, right? He just wanted somewhere for a land for Jewish people. But somehow somebody thought of Uganda, and Uganda was actually considered. Unpack that for us.
Yeah. Yes, there were a number of countries that were considered. So this was when the persecution of Jews in Europe, and we have to be clear, this was in Europe where the Jews were being persecuted.
That's right.
it was not in Africa, it was not in the Middle East, it was not anywhere else. It was in Europe where anti-Semitism was very high and the Jewish people had to flee. So when they were looking for a sanctuary, they had all these options because the British Empire was still in its peak at the time, and it had all these countries it controlled. So Herzl, during the Balfour, I think it was the convention, I forget which
the
convention
Balfour
exactly.
Declaration, yeah.
Yeah, he went and he suggested a couple of countries. It's like, well, we could look at Uganda, we could look at Kenya, Argentina was on the table as well, and then Palestine, of course, was also on the table. And all these countries were under the empire's control. So they sent people out to scout, and for one reason or another, thank goodness, Uganda was just not selected. Now, there is a strand of Zionists who will say, no, the reason we didn't go to either Uganda or Kenya or Argentina is because we knew that we had ancestral roots in Palestine, which is why they eventually selected Palestine.
Right.
But the fact of the matter remains that you considered other countries. This is blatant hypocrisy because it just does not make sense to me. You had all these other countries that you were thinking of moving to, but eventually you're like, okay, yeah, this one, because we have ancestral roots.
Should
So
we
it's
should we Nigerians feel left out because they didn't consider Nigeria?
you should be lucky. You should feel very lucky. You're like, okay, no. We don't want any more problems. Because I keep thinking about that. I'm like, with everything Uganda is dealing with right now, this would have been a disaster.
Yeah.
It would have been a disaster.
What's the Jewish community like in Uganda right now? Though, do they have a sizable community, or is it very small? And what are they saying about what we're seeing in Israel, or at least, sorry, in Gaza?
So in Uganda, they're not too many actually. I actually just discovered them a few years ago. They're quite few, and they're mostly found, I think, in eastern Uganda, and they're called the Abayudaya, which is a variation of the Arabic and Semitic word for Jewish. And they mostly keep to themselves. I have not heard of any instance of persecution of the Jewish community in Uganda. I've been looking, and for the most part, they just keep to themselves. They worship as they wish. Uganda is mostly free for everyone to worship how they want to. And we've never heard anything of them being conflicting with either the Christians or the Muslims or the traditionalists in the country. It's just not been a thing. As for their opinions on Israel, I will say I hear a lot more opinions from Christians than I do from the Jewish community.
Interesting.
Which is unfortunate. Yeah, it is unfortunate. And a lot of Christians are still very, very much in that cycle of, oh, these are chosen people of God. You cannot oppose them. Jesus would not want this. And it's been interesting in the last 2 years having these conversations and seeing how the shift has happened, where people are very uncomfortable with saying that the people of God would do something as evil as this. So it's small progress, but we still need more progress, I think.
Indeed. We have civil society and solidarity. South Africa and Algeria have historically taken the lead in defending Palestine. But in 2024, Pretoria brought Israel before the ICJ. Do you see the Ugandan civil society, youth, or diaspora movements stepping into that solidarity space? Or is activism too constrained by state surveillance and repression?
As heartbreaking as it is for me to say, I don't see Uganda stepping into that role for a couple of reasons. One, as you mentioned, suppression, especially right now as we gear up to go into an election year, is at an all-time high. Just this week, I saw some horrific videos of police brutality against people who were just gathering. So at this point in time, to say you are going to be a Ugandan who's going to take the Palestinian charge, it doesn't seem likely, mostly because of suppression. Then also we have some very serious problems we're dealing with a president who wants to live until he leaves this earth. So as unfortunate as it is for me to say, I don't see that. But I am very, very proud of the South African team. I was cheering for them the entire time they were in the ICJ.
I think that it's interesting how, often it's the young people that would go out and protest, even in Africa.
Yes.
And in the abroad, as we call it in Nigeria, you see young people and you see grannies, because we've seen the grandmothers who are protesting on behalf of Palestinian actions, because if they get arrested, like one granny said, well, it doesn't matter. They can't do anything to me. I've lived my life. So I would rather I get arrested than have young people get arrested. And we've seen many, 80s, 70s, some even in early 90s. And it seems insane. But here's the thing. Over in Africa, we're so burdened by so many other issues that, whilst we can and we do speak up for Palestine because we connect with their struggle, how do we then sort of balance that with also speaking up for ourselves and actually ensuring that we bring enough attention onto what's going on in our continent, Congo, Sudan, indeed, our sisters in sister country in Haiti and other black nations? How do we do that?
Yeah, that is a challenge. I will be the first to admit that is a challenge that I struggle with, because there's a lot of complexity to that. Once you speak up, you put a target on yourself, and more dangerously on family. It's been known to happen where activists, and especially political activists, have been silenced rather brutally. And if they will not, then their families are put on the line. So it is a very tightrope to walk. I want to highlight one way that I think we tried to do this. It was by the platform African Stream, which was unfortunately
Yes, of
recently
course.
yeah, they were doing an incredible job of
Yes.
trying to bring awareness to everything that was happening. I was collaborating with them primarily on the Palestine issue, but they had so many collaborators,
Of
and
course.
that is where the strength was, because it was a team and they were able to divide the work, that this team is handling Palestine, this team is handling Congo, Sudan, Haiti, and everyone else. It was an immense role that they were playing. And in my opinion, I think that is one of the reasons why they were deplatformed. They were simply too strong. And that is the power that comes with transnationalism or working as a group. Because African Stream never set out to say we're only a Nairobi based, or we're only a Kenyan enterprise, or we're only were Pan-African. Everyone was reporting from Nigeria. They had teams from the US. They were based in
Absolutely.
Nairobi. I'm based in England. We were all collaborating with this one vision for our continent, regardless of where we were based. And I think they did a wonderful job of trying to bridge that gap of, we will talk about the main issues, but we'll also talk about our continent, because this is our home at the end of the day. They're the only people I've seen who are trying.
Who are trying, and they did it so well. I'm so glad you mentioned African Stream, because that's the other thing. African Stream was basically bullied and deplatformed by the big bully, Biden's secretary, Anthony Blinken. Anthony Blinken, he makes a wild accusation on a platform as a representative of the USA. And he was not challenged. Nobody called him, no African country called him to order. Indeed, no African Union or ECOWAS or anything called him to order. So African Stream were eventually left by themselves, and slowly the platform, from one platform, demonetized to the point where they eventually had to close down. But I have to ask a question, and I'm glad you were a part of them, is that why didn't they go crowdfunding? Because so many of us would have done that. We would have crowdfunded for them to stay alive, like stay doing what they did best.
There was definitely an effort. Yeah, there was definitely an effort before the platform completely shut down. So when Blinken first attacked African Stream and they lost their platform on Instagram, on YouTube, and all their monetization, then at that point, they started a Patreon, because I was talking to Ahmed, who is the founder and my friend. They started a Patreon. They're like, please subscribe and support our work here. But I think, and this is maybe a reflection on human nature, we don't really react until it's really urgent. Because on the final post in the last week, when they released that, unfortunately, we're shutting down, then everyone wanted to crowdsource. But they had all these revenues for months. For months, he was saying, support our work. on our Patreon, join this and join this. And it was only at the very end, because again, this was a company, people were working, they had to be paid. So it was just not sustainable to keep going for too long. But I am very proud of the work that he was able to accomplish in that short time.
Incredibly proud. I think the message I would say, to Anwit, and we can move on to close the conversation, the part on African Stream, is that it is important to remember that people don't necessarily want to add several other platforms. Adi said, we are raising money. This is our crowdfunding link. Press this to donate. I really believe everybody would have donated. I'm on Substack. I'm on Patreon. I can't actually, and we have to remember that. So with all the work they've done, with the data they have, with the library of information and history, and excellent reportage, packaging, short documentaries, etc., that they've got, I would say that it would be great for them to actually go to, the crowdfunding, GoFundMe, or whichever one it is, and ask us to do that, because we would. Literally.
I will pass this on to him for sure. I will pass this on. I'll let him know, Ahmed, the people still need you. We're still holding space for you. If African Stream comes back, we'll be more than happy.
We do.
And I think it's a very common sentiment across the board. Honestly.
We do, because that is the bridge between civil society and government. That is the bridge between Africa and the global north. That is the bridge that brings us all together, and because we all get to learn about each other. But let me get on with my work. Sorry, people. I was just talking to a sister. We had to talk about Africa Stream because I've mentioned it before. You all know how I feel about Africa Stream closing down. Recently, we've seen Israel continue to kill journalists in Gaza. What do you think their intention is? I mean, those they're not killing. It came out yesterday, recently imprisoned under administrative detention another Palestinian journalist. So in I think that's in the West Bank. So when they're not killing the imprisoned journalists, what is Israel's intention?
To hide its crimes. In one sentence, that is it. Because what has set this genocide apart from other genocides, even from Sudan, even from Congo, is the amount of media coverage we've had from the start. It has, I can't remember in my lifetime a genocide that was unfolding in front of my eyes.
No.
Every day I would log in and I would see buildings being demolished every day. And I followed so many Palestinian journalists who, unfortunately, many of them are dead, or they had to flee their country. And Israel knows that the one thing that they cannot control in this genocide is the narrative. Because you can't keep telling people the Palestinians are terrorists when you're blowing up hospitals, you're leveling everything in Gaza. There are no more universities, there's no functional health system, there's no sanitation system, there's nothing left. And you cannot expect the rest of the world to ignore the evidence of their eyes. And this is why journalists are such a huge target for the Israeli regime. That is the only reason, because with social media, it changed the game completely. Before, when we were telling people, oh, Palestine is occupied, or Palestine, because I've been doing work on this Palestine occupation for over 10 years now. And it's only now that people can see it and they understand how terrible it is. Because we have journalists, we have movie directors. There was a movie that won, I think it was an Academy or Golden Globe.
That's right. Oscar.
When you have that kind of evidence in front of you, you cannot deny. You have to be a uniquely delusional person to really deny all the evidence of your eyes and say, no, I'm not going to oppose because, this is Israel. Either that or you're bought by AIPAC and you're paid for it. So it's one of the two. That's the only thing.
So we had a President Biden whose nickname, I didn't give him this nickname, people. Social media did. There you go. Mariam said it. And now we have a President Trump who is basically he has said it's up to BB to make the decision what he wants to do. Have we gone from fry pan to fire, or is it just a case of one devil and then it morphs into another devil and then the devil continues to morph into a bigger devil?
I don't think it's frying pan to fire, to be honest. I think this was actually an argument that a lot of Democrats had during the election last year. They were like, oh, Biden, at least he had Netanyahu on a leash. This is a lie. This is a blatant lie. And what I see happening is that one is more open about his support and his hands off is like, Israel can do whatever they want. Biden used to bring a sense of comfort and a sense of respectability to it and make it seem like, oh, I've talked to Netanyahu, I've told him this is the red line, I've told him this, and Netanyahu just didn't care. The genocide continued. But Biden was a face that allowed a lot of people who really do believe in the ideals of the West and the UK and the US, he allowed them to be ignorant in a way, to go to sleep at night saying, oh, you see, but our president tried. I have friends who I had this debate with, and they were like, no, he told them to stop. What else could he do? I'm thinking, what else can he do? He's giving them $3 billion US. He could choke that off and they would say nothing. Trump told Israel not to bomb Iran and they listened. So if you think your President Biden couldn't do anything, you are very sadly mistaken. So I don't think it's bad or worse. It's just now we see the face of the actual evil. Before, it was just masked so you could sleep at night. That is my opinion.
Indeed. Talking of the US, the Western we can now call them Western regimes, if you like. Western regimes or leaders or rulers of the Western regime have now said they're going to actually recognize a Palestinian state if Israel doesn't stop killing Palestinians, which is, first of all, I'd like you to talk to me about that sort of caveat. If you don't stop killing Palestinians, we will recognize a Palestinian state, a country that, or a land, a country, a people that existed independent of the global North. Even at the time when there was wars around Western Europe and they all hated each other. But I'd like you to unpack that for me. Secondly is the fact that a story broke yesterday, I think it was, that the US is denying and revoking visas for the Palestinian Authority and the PLO members ahead of the General Assembly. Now, this is the same General Assembly where they are supposed to be recognizing a Palestinian state. Unpack that for us, please, Mariam.
Okay, we'll talk about the first one, the hypocrisy of the Western leaders saying, if you don't stop killing, we will recognize the state. I don't think people really understand how evil that is. That the only thing that will get Israel to stop a genocide, the only thing that will make them even just reduce on the intensity of their evil is that we will allow these people who you're killing a right to exist in a land of their own. I'm not sure if we really understand how evil that is. That means that there is nothing, the West has decided there is nothing that they can do. There's nothing that Israel can basically do anything they want. And this is the only thing that they can do to them. They're like, if you don't stop killing them, we will give them land, which is already, I have strong thoughts and emotions about that because of the partition of it happened and everything of Palestine that happened and created this state of Israel. So it's already it's a very insidious tactic. That's me putting it as nicely as I can because we're live on. But it is just horrific hypocrisy. And I think for anyone who still had an ideal of what the West is, like, they're developed, they're egalitarian, I think this more than anything should wake everyone up to know that these countries are built on systems of oppression and they will stay in systems of oppression as long as they can. That's the first thing we need to be aware of. The second question you asked, please remind me, sorry, there were two questions that you asked. So this one was,
and then denying the visa to the Palestinian Authority. So they won't be at the General Assembly in September. The same assembly where there's Western regime leaders have said they're going to recognize a Palestinian state. They've been denied visa by the United States, Marco Rubio to be precise.
I think this, as an African, the one thing I immediately thought about and we should all think about is the partition of Africa that happened without any African input. Because
the Berlin
net was divided.
Yes.
The Berlin Conference happened with Africans present. These powers met and were like, okay, now we're going to divide up this continent. You get this part, you get this, you get this. When we, the people who live in the continent, who have roots going back generations, we're not there. We should see the exact same thing happening here because the US has no right, no country has any right at all to divide up another country if they do not belong there. This is something that we need to be very comfortable saying, and we should have no fear about it. No one, not the UN, not the US, not the UK, which is what started all this entire mess, has the right to divide Palestine. They don't belong there. They don't get to say this part is for Israel and this part is Palestine. This decision can only be made by Palestinians. It should only be made by Palestinians. And I think we sound the alarm. And if we compare the two evils, that I believe wakes people up. You're like, this is reminiscent of the Berlin Conference, and we need to stop it right now. We cannot allow this to happen again.
What's going on in Congo? We talk of the Berlin Conference. Before I open up the lines, people, 020127709993, 020146579190, and the WhatsApp where you should have been sending your questions, your comments for Mariam is 0809597505 is called. I'm with Mariam the Ugandan. You know why now, don't you? So Mariam, before we go quickly, and they've already started calling, you know, we have to talk about Congo very quickly. What's going on in Congo? Because President Trump made this whole big noise. I fixed the problem. You know, everybody's happy now. Congo's happy. I've stopped the war. That war has been going on for years, you know, in exchange for minerals, yada, yada, yada. But of course the war hasn't stopped, has it? The war, indeed the genocide in Congo is continuing.
Yes, it is. And I think this is, again, we need to understand how these problems came to be. Because the US, after Belgium, the US is the main reason why we have such unrest in Congo. The US is funding so many militias from Uganda, from Rwanda, even from Sudan, who are destabilizing Congo. People are being massacred because of the amount of wealth that that country has, that region has. So when Trump says, oh, you know, I've solved the problem, we should all know by now that he is just a showman. He very rarely gives any substantive evidence or anything substantial to back up his claims. More likely than not, just follow the money. Who's being paid off to do what? If he says I've solved the situation in Congo, my immediate thought is, okay, so what's the US getting out of this?
Great.
How much uranium or cobalt or coltan, whatever, is getting to them out of Congo? Who is being, because they have to recoup their investment.
Of course.
And that means them displacing people and massacring people. The war has not ended. It's just that the US has skewed it back in its balance. And we need to be able to see things from that perspective.
Thank you. Hello? Hello?
Hello, Sister. Good evening.
Good evening,
Sister. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I want to ask her, Uganda under Joe Biden was sanctioned by Joe Biden because of same-sex relationship, whatever that Uganda is doing against them. Now you have Joe Biden, you have Donald Trump, who has just struck a deal with Uganda to send back deportees from America back to Uganda. Uganda is ready to accept them. Do you think that Uganda will be able to do anything against the interests of America, especially now that they need all the support they can get from Donald Trump, given the background that they were not happy with Joe Biden?
Thank you. And I think you heard that because I saw you shaking your head, nodding your head. Hold on to that question. Let me pick up another one. If you want to write it down, write it down. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, good afternoon. Hello? And oh, sorry, your line. Hello, can you speak up? Hello. I'm really don't want to cut you off, but I have to. I call back, please, because I can't hear a word. Sorry. Yes, go ahead. Okay, they're calling again. Hold on one second. Hello.
Hello?
Turn off your radio, please. Hello.
Hello?
Yes.
Good evening. This
Good-
is Pastor Badamosi
Good evening,
from
Pastor
Surulere.
Badamosi. Yes, good evening, sir.
Yes. I want to ask you again. I'm a Nigerian. Is Nigeria under the protectorate of Britain? Can Britain deploy other people here in Nigeria, like as they are doing in Uganda now? They want to.
Yeah, but they're not
deploy
doing it in
people.
Nigeria. So what? I don't understand.
Yes. What I'm saying, I'm trying to compare. Is it possible? Is Nigeria?
Oh, okay. Could
still a
Nigeria be
protectorate of
next?
Britain?
I see what you're saying. Right. If they're doing it to
Yeah.
Uganda, could they possibly do it to Nigeria?
Can they do it to Nigeria?
Yes.
That's my fear now.
Yes,
That's
sir.
my fear.
I hear you. Thank you. Right. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to answer that because they've started calling. My listeners,
Okay.
they're like my co-host. They take over.
Okay, so the first question was about Uganda taking in these immigrants that are being expelled from
Yes.
the US.
Can
If
they
it's
say
being
no?
taken in.
Can they ever say no
I
to
do
the
not
USA?
think so. I do not think so. I think we always need to follow the money. And the main problem we have as African countries as a whole is that we are dependent on foreign aid. The US gives immense foreign aid to Uganda, immense military support to Uganda. For that reason, because we're going into an election cycle, there is no way that our president can turn that away, even if he wanted to, which I highly doubt he does. I don't think he'd be able to say, no, take these immigrants back. But we also have to realize how insidious this is because these people are not Ugandans. If you were deporting Uganda to Uganda, that would be one thing. But you're taking people who are maybe South Americans, people who are from every other continent and bringing them to Uganda. So that has to be a violation of a human rights rule somewhere. I'll look it up. I'm not exactly sure. The second question of if it could happen to Uganda, why wouldn't it happen to Nigeria? It absolutely could. It really could. And we have to pay attention to this because when the genocide started very early on, we had this question. We were speaking out and telling people if this is happening in Palestine, it is going to happen in all our countries. If they have surveillance in Palestine, if they have WhatsApp calls that are being tracked in Gaza, what makes you think you're safe where you are? And we're seeing it right now. This
Indeed.
monitoring that under the surveillance. So absolutely it can happen to every other African country, including Nigeria, unfortunately.
Thank you. Hello. Hello.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, I'm Madam Lucky. I'm calling from the
Go ahead, Madam Lucky.
Please help me ask your guest that with what is happening in Gaza, and with the silence of the Arab League, and with the support of the West and the Americans to their own brother, which is Israel, and with the complete silence of the Arab League, looking another way when little children and babies and hospitals and everything is bombarded. If ask your guest that if she's a very young student standing in front of her class teacher, if this were to be a kind of a story that was told to her, how will it describe Arab League?
Okay,
So
that's a great question. Thank you. What's your name again? Oh, that's a really it's a very creative question. So what my guest, and I've missed the name, or I didn't hear the name, is that given what's going on in Gaza or the genocide that we're witnessing, and indeed the land theft that we're witnessing and ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, if you were in front of a child, how would you explain the behavior, the response of the Arab League to what they are witnessing? Can you write that down and I'll just pick up this call? Hello? Hello?
Evening once again, Cecily.
Good evening, Emmanuel.
It's been alleged that after the South African government took Israel to court, that there has been systematic buying of real estate. In South Africa by the Israelis. If those claims are true, what is the opinion of your guest? And can the South African government do anything about this? Thank you.
Okay. Right. Did you hear that? Mariam, I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Why are you all calling? Oh, my word. Right. I'm going to give you a minute to answer those two so I can sneak in more calls because we've got they're telling me 3 minutes, less than 3 minutes.
I didn't
Go
catch
ahead.
the last one, but the first one of how I would explain the child, the response of the Arab League to a child. I think of my niece who is 7 years old. If someone was attacking us our family wasn't standing and supporting us against someone who was attacking us, how would I explain it to her? And the easiest way, because there's so many political factors at play, geopolitics and everything, I would tell her, maybe they're scared. They're scared that that person who is hurting the family could turn around and hurt them as well. And maybe they're playing a different game and they're trying to see if they can bargain with them. I am not saying this is right. I have my own thoughts about Arab League has responded, but this is how I would explain it to a child.
So share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, so my thoughts are, I really believe that the Arabs could do better. I really believe like Saudi could choke off the oil. Jordan has been atrocious. Egypt, Sisi is not someone who I respect, but shutting down the borders and letting Israel control the Rafah crossing, a lot could be done. But again, you have to understand Israel is backed by the big bad USA. So I understand their hesitancy. I do not support it, but I understand it. I understand it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a minute left, so I'm going to ask you to give us a message, and I think this is what we've got to start doing now. Leave us with a message for Africans, especially African Christian Zionists and the tiny little bit of Muslim Zionists that's remaining in Africa and Nigeria. I give you 30 seconds. Tell me, what message would you tell them?
I would start with an address to both books, or both. Go and read your books. My mother is Catholic, and when I told her what some Christians believe when it comes to Israel, she brought out her Bible and she sat me down and she's like, now let us look at this logically. I'm asking you all to go and read your scriptures. And you know, I keep hearing Christians say, what would Jesus do? Jesus Christ would not endorse this. We all know Jesus Christ would not endorse this. Muslim Zionists, if you exist, we need to have a chat. Me, as your Muslim sister, I need to talk to you in a way that I can't talk to you on a radio show, because that makes more sense.
99.3 Nigeria Info.
That's what I would say. Yes.
Thank you so much, Mariam, the Ugandan. You've got to come back. We've run out of time. Have a great weekend.
Unstoppable you, fueling your vitality the whole day through. Embrace each challenge with renewed
99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.